Hello everyone and welcome to Season of War. Tonight we are back with another short Age of Sigmar video. My name is Fabian and today we're gonna talk about the new Gloomspite Gitz Battletome. Without further ado, let's get started. It's becoming a habit now, but not too much has changed in this Battletome compared to the Index, even though the battle traits have been reworked, and we also have a bunch of new units. So most of the changes would be consequences of the battle trait that have been completely reworked, and on top of that there are also a few changes on some of the units. And then we're gonna cover obviously all the new units from the Gitmob, and the new armies of renown and regiments of renown. So first of all, we have the rework of the battle trait with the Bad Moon, and the Bad Moon is no longer starting in one quarter and moving across the table. Now you have a wheel, a bit like the old Nuggle wheel, and at the start of the game you will get to choose in which phase of the moon you start. There are 4 of them. There is Grinning, Scowling, Sulking and Cackling, and every round the moon is gonna move to the next phase. And then each of the units in the Battletome, based on their keyword, will be affected by the moon during 2 of the 4 phases of the moon. So for instance, Droggz will be affected when the moon is grinning and scowling, and Squigs will be affected when the moon is scowling and sulking. So it's less random than before, with the moon maybe moving towards the different quarters. It's also board wide now, but your units will in theory only be affected by the moon 2 rounds in the game, so you might want to time it. So for instance, your trolls get their buff rounds 2 and 3 when it matters the most. For the different bonuses that units have when they are affected by the Bad Moon, first, non-Squig Moon Clan gets +5 to their control score, Spiderfang get crits on 5 instead of 6s, Droggz subtract 1 rand for melee only, Squigs instead of rerolling their random value for the dice just can set it up to a 4, and finally Gitmob can use a charge or shoot ability even if they do use a retreat ability before. Note that the non-Squig Moon Clan and Spiderfang share the same part of the wheel, so they will be affected at the same time. So on these, most of them stay the same. The troll one is the biggest change, going from +1 a save to -1 rand is a slight downgrade. It's not really gonna do much, but the big difference is now it only works for melee and not shooting. On the Squigs, instead of getting a reroll, being able to change the dice to a 4 gives you the reliability that you might need, and obviously the Gitmob is brand new. Then onto the battle formations. Now the Spiderfang share their battle formation with the non-Squig Moon Clan, and they have at the end of your turn, if you're in combat, you can do a pile-in and do mortals. And there is a new battle formation for the Gitmob, and it gives them a core ability that's a retreat, but that allows them to do mortals when they retreat as well as move through models, which will synergize well with the effect of the Bad Moon when the Gitmob units are affected. Onto the spell lore, there is a change to the unlimited spell. Unfortunately, Gits are losing their -1 hit bubble, but instead they gain a spell that allows them to manipulate the moon. So if the spell goes off, you'll be able to roll a dice. On a 1, nothing happens. On a 2 to 5, the moon goes to the next phase, and on a 6, you can directly choose where the moon goes. Since it's unlimited, that means that you're gonna have multiple chances to be able to move the moon. It can be useful, like let's say you have a heavy Droggz list. You started on the 2 good ones, then round 3 you're not affected by your bonus anymore. With 2 wizards, you can move the moon twice to go back to where you started and get your buff again. So definitely a good tool to be able to manipulate the moon and always get the buffs when you want them, as long as you can get your spell off. Then we're gonna jump onto the units that have been updated. There are very few changes here. First, we have 2 changes on Scragrot. Obviously, his ability to decide if you wanted to move or not the moon has changed. Now it's just the moon stays in place. And then his Holy Within 12 ability that interacts with redeploy on Moon Clan units has changed. Instead of being automatically a 4, now it just doesn't cost any CP anymore. Then the Loot Boss on Giant Cave Squig has lost the +1 ahead that he was giving to a unit when he was using his chain activation. Boingrot Bounders got their charge mortals back from last edition. So instead of doing 2 up D3, when you charge, you roll a dice for each model in the unit, and on a 4 up, it's going to do 1 mortal. So if you have a reinforced unit, you're going to do an average 5 mortal wounds on the charge. For the Denghold Droggz boss, there is a change on his rampage. Instead of being a 3 up and him being in melee and affecting other trolls in melee for +1 attack, now it's on a 4 up, but he doesn't have to be in melee anymore, and it affects every troll whole within 12. Then onto the Denghold Droggz. They removed the restriction to be in combat to use his rampage, so now you can just move 6 inches as long as you're finishing combat in any combat phase. Makes it quite hard for your opponent to deal with it if you just stay behind the line. He might move 6 inches and engage a unit. And then the Skitterstrand Arachnarok has seen his health characteristic reduced to 13 instead of 14. And then there are 2 more changes that might be typos. For now, we're gonna have to consider that they are true unless there is an FAQ, but to me, they seem unlikely. The first one is the Snarlfang Riders. Their mounts will not hit on 3s, but every other similar wolf hits on 4s in the book. And then on the Web Spinner Shaman, he has seen his control characteristic increase to 5, and that just seems to be a copy-paste from the big spiders. This one is the little guy. But again, until they fix it, that's what we have to use. I just wanted to be exhaustive for all the changes that are in the book. Hopefully I didn't miss any. Then we also have changes on one of the manifestation and on the terrain, again, to reflect the new battle trait. So first on the manifestation with the Malevolent Moon. Now, pretty simple. When units are wholly into all of it, they are affected by every phase of the moon. Pretty strong, pretty efficient. And then for the Shrine, it kept his ability to bring back units with the recursion, and they just simply removed the one that gives the moon buff if you're close to it. So now the terrain only does recursion. On to the more exciting part now with all the new units for the Gitmob. And first we have the new unique leader with Droggz da Sanchopa. Like every other Gitmob Cavalry or Chariot, he has 12-inch move, 7 health on this guy with a 4-up save and a control of 2. He's somewhat decent in melee, with all his attacks being damage 2, and his wolf actually hits on 3s, because he's the biggest and meanest of the wolves. He comes with 3 abilities. First, he has a classic chain activation with a Gitmob unit, doesn't give any bonus. Then he has a once per battle, and on a 4-up you can pick a unit wholly within 9 that has been declared as the target of a fight ability from your opponent. And then you can move 2d6, you can move through the combat range of enemy units, so it gives you a sort of a retreat. You just need to roll well enough on your 2d6 to get out of combat, otherwise it does nothing. And finally, a pretty useful passive that gives every enemy unit within 6 inches -1 a hit and can't use a lot attack. So overall a pretty decent cavalry hero with some good utility with his passive, and his once per game ability can also be game breaker in some situations. Then we have the Shaman on Chariot, and I'm not gonna even attempt to pronounce his name. Also 12-inch move, but 9 health with a 4-up save. And he's a wizard one, but he's also War Machine, which means that he will not benefit from Guarded Hero. Its melee attacks are meaningless, but speaking of Guarded Hero, he has a passive ability that will make that every other Gitmob unit that are not Shaman and Chariot untargetable for shooting if they are wholly within 6. So that would be a way, for instance, to protect your other chariots or your big cavalry hero. But that means that this shaman is gonna take all the shooting attacks. And then he also has a once per turn army ability in the shooting phase, where you can do D3 mortals to 3 units within 9 inches. So an interesting character. It's somewhat tanky for a small wizard, considering it's 9 health with a 4-up save, but it has absolutely no protection to shooting, and on the contrary, it's gonna be the opposite, because you will be able to protect your other units, so he's gonna take all the focus fire. Its use will probably be redepending on the quantity of shooting in the meta. Then we have the other variant of the kit, the Snarl Boss on Chariot. This guy shared the same profile with 12 health, 9 wounds and a 4-up save. He's obviously a bit more fighty, considering he's a boss. And he comes with 3 abilities. A once per battle ability that you declare in the hero phase and lasts for the rest of the turn. That makes that all enemy units have -1 a hit if they are in combat with chariots, and all the chariots have +6-inch move. On top of that, he also has a chain activate with other non-hero chariots. And finally, he has an ability that allows him to get out of combat and do D6 mortals to a unit passed across. And it does not have the retreat keyword, so you can charge after that. You don't need to have, for instance, the effect of the moon. Note that you can use it if you're in combat, but you don't have to, so if you're just like 3 inches away from your opponent, you can just like pass over them to do your D6 mortal, finish outside of 3, and then still charge. So pretty good movement ability, and it's once per battle is gonna really benefit heavy chariot lists, so I guess we'll have to see how good the chariots are. And next we have the regular chariots. They come in units of 2, and each of them have 6 health, also on a 4-up save. They have a very similar ability, except that it's once per turn army. So if you have multiple chariot units, only one can use it. And the other difference is that it only does D3 mortals and not D6. But you also get +1 for each model in the unit. So with a reinforced unit, could go up to D3 +4. Again, very good ability, all movement abilities are good. This one can do quite a lot of damage more reliably than the hero. And with a 4-up save, they are somewhat tanky for a Gitz unit. Next, we have the return of one of the underworld units, which is now split in two, with the leader of the unit being a Snarl boss, and the two other little guy being his retinue. There are two separate units. They both have 5-up save, so they are not as tanky. And the boss gives +2 charge to any Gitmob Cavalry or even 12, as well as if it charged, it can give 2 other Cavalry units +1 attack for the rest of the turn. So if you want to play heavy Cavalry and not Chariot, you can definitely bring this guy. And then his retinue is just there to give him and them a 5-up wall. Following that, we have the new unit of cavalry with the Sniper Cavalry, a unit of 3 bigger wolves, and each of them have 2 goblins on top. They are each 3 wounds with a 4-up save again, and their 2 abilities only apply if they charge. They will get strike first, and their OC will be increased by 5 for the rest of the turn. Their damage will still be quite unreliable because they have no rend, and also the riders only wound on 5s. But it's quite a bit of attack, and all of these attacks will be damage 2 on the charge, so it's gonna work well on low saves, just it will not be able to break through good armor saves. And last but not least, we have the Doom Diver Catapult. It's pretty tanky, 12 health and a 4-up save, and it has a fun rule, just not as fun as it used to be in like older games where you might hit other units. So if we look at its shooting profile, it has 24-inch range, 4 attacks, force freeze, rend 3, and 3 damage each. So these Doom Divers can do a lot of work. So in the shooting phase, you can decide to be able to reroll your hit rolls if they fail, your Doom Diver trying to rectify the trajectory. However, if you do that, you will reduce the rend by 1 for each dice that you reroll. So on one hand, they are able to hit better if they want to correct their trajectory, but while doing so, they'll probably lose some speed and do less impact, so the rend goes down. It's pretty good range, good damage, good rend, especially if you roll well and you don't need the rerolls, but you still have a backup plan if you need to. So that sounds like a pretty good artillery piece to me, and the model is pretty amazing, so I'm expecting that we're gonna see them, at least people try and see what they do. But yeah, that's it for the Battletome. Not too many changes, but a lot of exciting new units. They're gonna bring some speed as an alternative to the squigs. They are tankier, probably do a bit less damage. I doubt that we're gonna see a full army of Gitmob doing very well because they lack rend or mortal wounds, but a few units to be able to have speed on the flanks and do okay damage sounds more realistic. And then we have 2 armies of renown and 2 regiments of renown. First, we have Droggz Gitmob. It's an army of renown where you can bring any Gitmob unit, and you have to have the named leader as the general. For the battle traits, you can put your units if you want in reserve, and they can deep strike or within 6 of the battle edge outside of 9 of enemy units. And then there are 2 combat phase abilities. The first one is in any combat phase. You can pick a unit in combat with a Gitmob unit that charged, and a 3-up cannot move when it does its pile-in. And then the other one is in the enemy combat phase. You can pick a unit that is in combat with an enemy unit that charged, and on the 4-up you can retreat. So doubling down on the ambusher and strike and fade style of the Gitmob. There are 2 heroic traits. The first one is every time the carrier uses either a retreat or his movement phase ability, if it's the chariot, then he's gonna do an extra D3 mortal to a unit in combat. And the second one gives a 6-up ward to all units wholly within 9, as long as the bearer has taken no damage. For the artifact, it's basically a grenade. Once per battle, you can pick point within 9 inches in the shooting phase, and then every enemy unit within 3 of that point is gonna take 2-up D3 mortals. And finally, for the spell lore, we have just 1 spell that's unlimited, and it's gonna give crit 2 hits to unit within 12. And for the manifestation lore, it's just summon Mork's Mighty Mushroom. For the next Army of Renown, we have the King's Gitz, which is Kragrod's Army of Renown. So he has to be the mandatory general. You can also bring any Moon Clan unit, up to 1 Loot Shrine, up to 2 non-hero Troll units, and you cannot bring any Regiment of Renown. For the battle traits, while a unit is wholly within 9 of either Skragrod or the Moonshrine, it gets a buff, either +5 OC if it's a non-squig Moon Clan unit, or if it's a squig unit, instead of rolling the random dice for the movement, you can use a a 4. Then in the deployment phase, you can give an extra enhancement to D3 heroes that do not have one already. And then every troll you have in the army is gonna have a 4-up bodyguard to any hero. So it can be a 4-up ward, but every ward you make transfers from the hero to the troll. We then have 2 heroic traits and 3 artifacts. The first one is a recursion in addition to the Bad Moon Loon Shrine, except that you do not have to roll dice and the hero has to be in range of the Loon Shrine. And the second one allows the hero that has the heroic trait to pick a unit within 3 of it that is not in combat and roll D3. You add that to the movement characteristic, but if the target finishes a move within 3 of the hero, then that hero is going to take also the same D3 as mortals. So you want to give it to a unit and have them move away from the hero, just getting an extra D3 movement. Then for the artifacts, the first one adds +1 to the attack characteristic of a weapon of the bearer, and every time that bearer also uses a retreat, he gets +1 attack for that weapon. Next one is pretty good. It gives the unit a 6-up ward or a 5-up ward. Is that the only unit from this army of renown that is contesting this objective. And then lastly, we have the Whatnot of Prestige. There is a small error here. It's end of any turn, so it's just a straight up upgrade from the grenade we had in the previous Army of Renown. At the end of any turn, you're going to be able to pick a point within 9 inches, and on a 2-up, do D3 mortals to every unit within 3 of that point. So pretty powerful as long as the hero can stay alive, maybe hidden behind some lines of stabbers, and just like poke mortals to the enemy that get close to him. And for the spells, the animated one is cute. It's gonna be +1 control, +1 attack for the champion, and +1 dice to rally for a unit within 18. And the second one, the non-animated one, is also within 18, and is gonna give the unit anti-hero +1 rend. For the manifestation law, it's summon the Malevolent Moon, which does nothing considering that the moon now only affects the buff that are not in this Army of Renown, which is an interesting choice. But overall, a pretty fun Army of Renown. The artifact and heroic traits are pretty good, and you still get the recursion. You have actually an enhanced recursion, so probably something to explore here. And then for the Regiment of Renown, the first one has a bunch of models actually. It's gonna be the Underworld Warband, so the Snarlboast and the 2 retinue, 2 units of 3 Wolf Cavalry, the new ones, and 1 unit of 2 chariots. And the special rule for this regiment is that if you want to, you can put all the units in reserve. Cannot do only one of them, has to be all of them or none of them. And then you can deploy all of them at once on the table. And they can be anywhere on the battlefield outside of 9. It's worth noting that it's a regiment that has like 5 units total, which is a lot. And then for the last one of this review, we have Skull Creek's Loon Lads, which is 1 Loon Boss, 1 unit of 20 Stabbers, and 1 unit of 5 Loon Smasher Fanatics. And they get anti-charge +1 rand if they are contesting the objective you control. That's it for today for the review of the new Gloomspite Gitz Battletome. Some interesting changes, especially with like all the new units for Gitz obviously, with all the cavalry, chariots, and the Doomdiver catapult. It's gonna take a bit of get used to of the new will cycle for the moon instead of the random movement across the table, to make sure that you can optimize and having the buffs you need on the units you want at the right time. So knowing where you are on the wheel, what's coming next, if you have to use the manifestation to always get the buff, or use the spell to move the moon 1/4 further, that's where we're gonna see the difference between the good and not as good Gitz players with that new Battletome. The armies of renown are pretty classic, obviously not as interesting as the big one that we had in the previous one, but still there is potential, especially for Daking's Gitz. But yeah, that's it for today. Please let us know in the comments what you thought, and we'll see you in the next one, hopefully soon for Soulblight Gravelords.